Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Killed for the Cash.
My uncle was a kind person and a trusting person. His wife called me and said that he has been murdered. He was face up, shot in the neck.
Lying in a pool of blood. His glasses were broken and blood spattered.
I knew it was my job to catch whoever did it.
Somebody desperate enough to do a crime in the middle of the day like that, where they would take over $100,000 and end up killing the man for it.
Was the killer somebody that he knew?
Because we had the DNA, we were really persistent.
I was thinking that he's going to get away. I thought maybe he would never be caught. You asked me what this was about, and I told you the murder of Spear Chatterjee. Do you want to tell me about that? You tell. Well, I believe otherwise. We have a lot of proof that you were there. More than you think, myself, probably. It was a highlight of my career to put my handcuffs on him. You want to tell me about that day?
The midday sun shines high above the Houston suburb of Oak Ridge North when a customer at a local gas station stumbles on a crime scene.
He had driven up to the gas station and gone inside to presumably make a purchase and saw a guy in the booth, not visible except for his feet, which were lying on the ground. And he realized immediately that there was a distress situation. So he went outside and called the police.
When I arrived and walked inside, everything appeared in order. But when I walked around to the booth, there were signs of a struggle. In the picture, you can also see a chair turned over. It brings back some of the same feelings I had that day, even though it was 18 years ago. More now. I saw the body laying there. His head was turned to the side. He was face up, laying on his back.
He had been shot in the head and also in the neck, and it bled everywhere. It was a quite bloody scene.
Looking at the gunshot wound, there was a tremendous amount of stippling gunshot residue. The gun was almost against his neck. There hadn't been a homicide in Oak Ridge North in, maybe 20 years. I was nervous because it was my first homicide and I was the lead detective. So I knew it was my job to catch whoever did it.
The victim is the owner of the gas station, 58-year-old Subir Chatterjee.
Me and Shubir was very close. Shubir is my brother, and I was about 2 years older than him. Everybody in my household, loved him. My son Neil was very close to him.
My uncle Shubir, when he first came to the U.S. from India, he was my only relative outside of my parents in the U.S. He actually lived with my family in our home. And so the first few years of my life, he was a constant presence.
After moving to the U.S. with the help of Neil's father, Sabir opened a gas station in the Houston suburbs.
When I was a kid, we would go and visit. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't get a lot of gifts at Christmas. So my uncle would take us to his store and just basically let us get whatever we wanted, sodas or gum or little toys. He was a very generous person, not just with me, but with everyone.
Sabir quickly discovers a profitable sideline.
The area around Houston where the gas station was at the time was really being built up. So you had a lot of laborers and folks who maybe didn't have access to traditional bank accounts. And my uncle discovered this opportunity to make money cashing checks.
Sometimes, when we are visiting him, many times he go to the bank and get the money. So it's close to 200,000 he was doing that. He said that, well, it's a very good day for me, it was lots of money,
Sabir runs his check cashing business from a specially made booth inside the gas station.
It was bullet resistant glass. He was thinking of trying to deter robberies himself by making a booth like that inside his store. Mr. Chatterjee was very paranoid about people. As I recall, as a patrol officer, I remember taking a call there on a fraudulent call there, and I had to conduct my investigation through a slot in the window. He wouldn't open the door for me, but we discovered as we were doing our investigation. Mr. Chatterjee would allow frequent customers into his booth.
I told Subhi's concern about his safety. We said this is risky business. We always hear people getting robbed. He said, well, I'm safe in the booth. Don't worry, I will be safe.
Now the family's worst fears have come true.
Shubhi's wife called me and she has been murdered, shot dead. And that's all I remember. After that, my telephone fell from my hand and I was on the floor. So my wife took the phone and tried to get the details and what happened. I always try to forget the day, but it is impossible. It's not possible to forget.
I kind of blacked out in that moment. My wife now tells me that I threw the phone across the room, didn't even hang up, and I just couldn't process it.
I would say the first thing that the detectives did was try to find if there was any video in the store.
Surveillance cameras were installed and visible at the gas station. However, they had never been hooked up.
I believe because some of the people that he would do business with did not want their pictures taken.
Their main business was cashing checks. Then he had a lot of shady people coming and going out of that place.
Detectives search for evidence in the booth where Sabir was killed.
We didn't want to move the body and disturb the crime scene at that point. Sabir had the phone receiver in his hand. There was a spent shell casing on the floor. It was easy to see that it was a .32 caliber. The door jamb had been broken off. Somebody had to kick the door in to get to Sabir.
When he interviews eyewitnesses, Hubbard quickly discovers that it wasn't the killer who forced his way into the booth.
It turned out that one of the people who found Sabir kicked down the door. So that led them to the thought of how the killer got access to the booth. Sabir would not just let anybody in the booth. So was the killer somebody that Sabir knew?
People who would frequent the store and were allowed into the booth would see that he generally placed the money in his briefcase with the top up. So it was clearly visible. in the security booth, the main thing that was missing was Sabeer's briefcase. We went through his business records the morning of his homicide. He had a cash delivery of, I think it was $198,000 from a armored car. So that's certainly enough money to pique someone's curiosity.
And it turned out that a witness was on the scene that day, and he sees a white Oldsmobile Alero sitting outside the gas station with a fairly skinny white guy in the driver's seat. And coming out of the gas station, the witness saw the 6-foot-tall, olive-skinned man in a leather jacket and a sort of newsboy or cabbie hat with a red birthmark, carrying the briefcase under his arm. And the witness sees this man get into the Alero, and it speeds off.
We theorized that was Sabeer's missing briefcase and a large amount of cash.
Police, of course, their ears perked right up, and they thought, this is our suspect.
I was very confident it was our guy. We were looking for somebody desperate enough to do a crime in the middle of the day like that, where they would take over $100,000 and end up killing the man for it.
Witnesses described a white Oldsmobile Alero. It had a paper plate driving away from the store at a high rate of speed. We theorized somebody had taken the license plate off so that we couldn't identify the car. So we pursued this. The Department of Motor Vehicle provided us a list of about, I think it was close to 400 cars, but we were never able to identify the exact car.
Detectives hire an artist to create composite sketches of the two men described by witnesses.
Those were the people we concentrated on. This older male with the briefcase, the one that he had an olive skin complexion, the witnesses said he's not Hispanic, but he does have an olive skin complexion. So that sort of led us to believe at that point that this guy was Middle Eastern.
Next, Hubbard looks into using a promising new field of forensic science to identify the perpetrator.
DNA was more or less in its infancy. We knew people that could be identified with greater certainty through DNA than fingerprints. But in 2002, DNA was becoming real popular with law enforcement to identify people. There was just a tremendous backlog to finally get your DNA analyzed, even on a homicide.
Police want to test the blood left at the crime scene because they suspect that some of it came from the killer as well as the victim.
The odd thing about it was Sabeer wore glasses, and there was also a 90-degree blood drop on the lens of his glasses that were totally inconsistent with blood spatter from the gunshot. It's like blood just falls down, hits the floor, and spreads out. So that was unusual. It looked as though somebody had stood over him, I guess, to make sure that he was indeed dead. So we collected the 90-degree blood drops. We had a fairly large quantity. It took a while, as I recall, for DPS, for the crime lab, to actually confirm that there were at least 2 sets of DNA in the crime scene. There was Sabeer, and there was also DNA from an unidentified male.
And we put that DNA in the CODIS hopefully to get a hit. We were looking for a criminal that's been in the system. We were thinking we would get a hit right off the bat.
but surprisingly, they didn't get any hits because it was felt that this killer, who was so brazen, had likely done something before, but that was not the case, at least not to the level that he was entered into the federal criminal DNA database. So from there on out, there was not much they could do with the DNA. They had the guy's DNA, but that doesn't lead to a name.
Investigators shift focus to Sabir's check cashing business.
Detective Hubbard figured out that this check cashing business was operating in a larger scale than he anticipated.
Their main business wasn't pumping gas, it wasn't selling snacks. As a matter of fact, I remember in that store, a lot of this stuff was expired.
From time to time, Sabir would cash checks in excess of $100,000.
I mean, I had no clue of that. I figured it was just your common day worker cashing a $200 or $300 check.
So there was a lot of cash flowing through the gas station.
Sabir had a logbook in the office, and he would take photocopies of their driver's license. So many driver's license copies were found in his files. Quite a few people were sort of engaged in nefarious activity, stuff that's under the table. Sabir's business was sort of no questions asked. It wasn't his job to question the source of the checks that he was taking in.
One man named Terry Edwards immediately jumps out.
Terry was a regular check cashing customer of Sabir's, and Terry somewhat resembled the guy in the sketch with the cap and the Alero.
I got a call from an investigator with the Harris County DA's office. They were working a case on Terry. Terry had been defrauding the company that he worked for. It was a furniture store, and Sabir was going to be their star witness. Sabir gets killed about, I think, 2 weeks or so before the trial starts. We really were interested in that.
After Sabir's death, Terry's sort of bragging that he was not going to jail. He had the charges beat. Now, the only way to make sure that that would happen is to remove any witnesses who could testify against you. So this became, all of a sudden, a very, very good lead.
Terry certainly had motive to kill Sabir.
He was our number one suspect.
So I was like, this is it. This is the guy.
The prime suspect was this guy, Terry, who was a regular check cashing customer of Sabir's, but it turned out that the checks were fraudulent. So police talked to Terry in an interview. He denied having anything to do with Sabir's murder. He said he'd gone to lunch with a coworker between 12 and 1, the time of the murder. But there was no record at the restaurant they said they ate at of that lunch. So that made Terry even more interesting to investigators.
There's nowhere near enough evidence to charge Edwards with murder, but he's convicted of the fraud charges, giving detectives an opportunity to collect his DNA and compare it to the DNA found at the crime scene.
Terry went to state prison. We flew up there. We had a warrant, but he volunteered to give us DNA. It was not a match. Boom, hit the brick wall and have to start from scratch all over again.
Investigators go back to Sabir's logs and look for more customers with questionable backgrounds.
Detective Hubbard told me that they encountered criminals at every corner in this investigation. They were literally coming out of the woodwork. Because if you think about the people who would frequent this type of check cashing business, you do have people who are anxious to immediately get hold of their ill-gotten gains.
Over the years, we were locating people and interviewing them, asking for DNA. I wish I could tell you how many people, but it was just nonstop, it seemed like.
I got to the point where I would not let myself get hopeful because it hurt so much to hit the brick wall. And it got to be devastating.
The Oak Ridge North Police Department was not going to give up. We would not have given up on the family. Under my watch or the next chief's watch, we would not have given up on that homicide.
But they tried everything that the science would give us at that point in time.
We were never able to identify the few people that everybody described and that we thought at that time were involved in the homicide. We spent years of the investigation trying to find these two gentlemen, and we were never able to do that.
We followed every lead available, but as time went on, it turned into a cold case.
The case of the murdered gas station owner goes as cold as a Texas ice storm.
Neil would call me once a year, generally on the date of Sabir's murder.
I was really the one that continued to pursue it. I wanted to see justice. My family lost their faith in the system.
I thought maybe it would never be solved. Just praying that it gets solved. But thought that maybe I have to go to my grave, not knowing who killed him.
My family did not believe that a collection of white police officers in rural Texas would care about the murder of an Indian grocer, and they would just bury the case, and they couldn't have been more wrong.
I wanted to retire, but I had promised Neil that I would not retire until we identified this person and arrested him. It took 16 years for the DNA technology to catch up.
And that's when Detective Hubbard had an aha moment.
The veteran investigator hears about new DNA testing techniques pioneered by a company called Parabon Nanolabs.
So I sent them a sample of the blood drop from the crime scene.
Parabon did an updated phenotype where they try to interpret what this person might actually look like. Hubbard believed that the person was of Middle Eastern descent.
But they discovered that this DNA was Hispanic, and the person was from the Nuevo Leon area of Mexico, which borders Texas. We had believed that it was Middle Eastern the whole time for the first 16 years. We chased these ghosts down all sorts of rabbit holes. It really threw us off.
Because we had the DNA, we were really persistent. I knew we were going to eventually find them. It was just a matter of time.
Next, the experts at Parabon turn to a technique called familial DNA testing, using the DNA found in the blood at the crime scene to try and find close relatives of the perpetrator.
It seemed like some sort of magic hocus pocus that you put a bunch of genetic code into a database and the genealogist can figure out who that person is based on connectivity with their relatives. Forensic genealogy was just hitting everyone's radar in sort of the crime fighting world because it was a new tool that promised the possibility of putting a name to unknown DNA profiles. In order to compare different genetic profiles, what's called a SNP profile is prepared.
Parabon's forensic genealogist loads the SNP profile from the blood into a genealogical database and builds a complex family tree with the results.
Parabon went back to the mid to late 1800s to develop a family tree on the 90-degree blood draw to try and identify other family members. A month later, Parabon comes back and says, okay, our suspect was one of 3 brothers. I knew then that we could indeed solve this case.
It felt like we were getting answers. It felt like for the first time we were on the right track.
The youngest brother was too young at the time of the homicide to really be involved. One brother had moved to Washington State. The only brother left lived only about 30 minutes from the gas station.
His name is Martin Tellez.
This is a photo of Martin Tellez. The first time I saw his picture was on a driver's license photo.
Detectives need a DNA sample from Tellez to be certain they finally have their elusive suspect.
He lived and was born in Texas, but still he had family ties in Mexico. And we were thinking if he'd found out that we were on to him, that he would probably flee to Mexico.
We set about trying to covertly get DNA from him. So we set up surveillance at his house. We were waiting for Martin Tellez to discard a cigarette, gum, anything.
And that never really panned out, but the FBI offered to assist us, and they got lucky and followed he and his wife to a restaurant. And once they cleared out, they secured the table, and Lieutenant Hubbard raced over there.
I collected the items that Martin had placed in his mouth. A coffee cup, a spoon, a fork, and of all things, a partially eaten piece of toast. I found out from the crime lab that bread was an excellent source of DNA because of its porous nature. There's a lot of DNA that's in your saliva that sticks with the toast. Everything in this case is compared to the partially eaten piece of toast of all things.
Scientists extract Martin Tellez's DNA from the bread and test it to see if it matches the 90-degree blood drops found at the murder scene.
I wore out the knees on a couple pair of blue jeans praying for 18 years. But when God answers prayer, he does it spectacular. I got a call one day from the crime lab in Houston. The head of the DNA analysis told me, Ken, not only do you have a match, you have an exact match. They give a percentage likelihood of another unrelated person having the exact DNA that Martin had. And their odds were 10 to the 27th power.
Can't call him in. He's out of breath. He's so excited. I mean, he's been a police officer forever, right? And just seeing how excited he was about the possibility of solving this case that has haunted him for most of his career, it was really, really special. And so I said, well, get up here. Let's write this warrant. I'm ready.
The match of the DNA. It was everything. It was everything. That was the basis of the arrest warrant for Martin. Yeah, it was crucial.
Martin Tellis has never been in any trouble with law enforcement. I think within the 18 years he was stopped for a traffic citation and was given a verbal warning, not even a written citation.
Tellez's clean record explains why his name didn't show up in CODIS searches.
It was somebody who was a first offender, so he wasn't ever going to pop up as a suspect on this case.
In the years since the murder, Tellez has been living a quiet life with his wife and kids in a suburb close to Severe's gas station.
Martin had just gotten a job and was happy, and he posted it on LinkedIn. And from that, then we knew where he worked. So we went there. And as it turned out, he was the only one in the office. As soon as I opened the door, I recognized him as Martin Tellez. I walked in, I introduced myself, and told him I had a warrant for his arrest.
Do you have anything on you? No, sir. Nothing whatsoever? No. You ever been arrested?
No, sir.
You have an ID?
Yes, sir.
Where's it at? I'll try and get mine if I didn't.
No.
Say it right there. Officer.
May I ask what is it?
Lieutenant Oversman.
Sure, it's for the murder of Severe Chad. His eyes went wide, and then he dropped his head to his chest. You have the right to remain silent and not make any statement. It was a highlight of my career to put my handcuffs on him. I have goosebumps right now.
I'll never forget the day Albert called me to tell me he had made the arrest. And he literally cried. It's one of the most powerful moments of my life. I was just overcome with just complicated emotions, but mostly, joy and relief.
Martin Tellez is brought to the Oak Ridge Police Department for an interview. Prosecutor Donna Hanson joins Detective Kent Hubbard for questioning.
So as we walked into the room to try to take a statement from Martin Tellez, one of our goals was to see would he admit to what he had done.
I told Martin, look, what I'm going to ask you about is something that you've lived with for the past 18 years. And I'm sure you'd like to get that off your chest. This is your first arrest. I would think you would remember that like it was yesterday. I won't lie to you. I'll do my best with recollecting.
Tellez admits to going to the gas station that day back in 2002 to commit a robbery.
Martin told me he didn't intend on killing him. He produced a gun and said, I want all the money. Severe hit him over the head with a telephone, and that's where the blood came from. Right, money. Yes, just was shot him in the neck and that you shot him. Yeah.
It was watching a man who's kept a secret for 20 years, just kind of unburdening himself in that moment. His children were going to find out. His wife was going to find out that he wasn't the guy that she thought he was.
Nobody was supposed to get hurt. I felt so horrible forever. I'm sorry to use the word, but I felt horrible for a very long time. It was finally over for him. Did you ever think you were going to get caught for this? Deep down inside, I did. I didn't think that was going to happen.
to the DNA. And it was, it comes together because blood, because of the DNA testing. And that's good for the problem.
Who had thought the guy would just confess?
After he confessed, he asked to call his wife.
Hello? We have been arrested. I did something bad a long time ago. 2002. It's hard to me. I hope I didn't lie to the police. I was gonna lie, but I just I decided it was time. I've ruined his family and mine.
He finally told his wife what he'd done for the first time after almost 18 years of marriage. And I could hear her screaming through the phone.
Martin was charged with capital murder for killing Subir Chatterjee in the course of a robbery.
Finally, Detective Hubbard can set a date for his long-awaited retirement.
I had done my job. When you spend, I guess, your whole life working, it's natural, I think, to look forward to retirement.
As he awaited trial, COVID hit. COVID was going to run rampant through the jails and prisons, and anybody who didn't have to be there, they didn't want to be there. So they reduced Tellez's bond to $500,000, and he bonded out.
I was at a golf outing with friends, and I got a call from Charlie Nation. Charlie said that Martin had escaped. He cut his ankle monitor off.
He just decided to cross the border into Mexico.
I was anxious and nervous and thinking that he's going to get away.
I was pretty irritated. I was irritated that we had, that they even allowed him to have bond. And now Martin Tellez was in Mexico.
The Texas Rangers are charged with bringing Tellez back to face justice, and they call Kent Hubbard out of retirement to help.
I knew more about Martin than anyone else in law enforcement, so they were calling me quite often to pick my brain about family members and places in Mexico.
Texas Rangers decide to talk to his wife. They were at her home, and they happened to get lucky in that the phone rang, and it was him calling her.
Martin Tellez at the time wanted to see his family one more time.
Hey, Martin, it's Derek with the Texas Rangers. Hey, you all right, buddy?
A bit better.
Yeah.
The ranger conveyed to him over the phone he couldn't do that if he was in Mexico.
Tellez started talking about if he never came home and would the ranger make sure that his body got back to his family. So now it started to seem like he was maybe going to harm himself. Suicide was not absolutely out of the question. The ranger says, you need to come turn yourself in, or you'll forfeit the $500,000 bond. Your wife is going to have to work for the rest of her life. So it seems that Martin Tellez finally decided that the jig was up.
I will cooperate.
Okay.
I'll be at the waterfront and at the
Tonight, U.S. Marshals say a capital murder suspect is once again in custody and was in this vehicle arriving at the Montgomery County Jail. 44-year-old Martin Tellez was out on a $500,000 bond when he removed a GPS monitor and fled to Mexico.
A week after he had escaped, he finally walked back across the Gateway Bridge in Brownsville and was arrested by the Rangers. Martin went into court and accepted a plea of guilty and a prison term of 60 years.
Seeing Martin Tellez in person for the first time, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. You know, for 20 years, I've dreamt about the moment I would get to confront my uncle's murderer, and to actually have that opportunity in my victim's impact statement was just overwhelming emotionally. As I look at the defendant and his young family, who had nothing to do with this, my instinct is to want to forgive him. But I cannot. Because when he murdered my uncle, he hurt not just me and my family, he hurt the entire community. After my reading of the victim's advocate statement, I walked over to his wife and parents, and I just let them know I feel sad for them. His father said to me, "I'm so sorry for everything your family has suffered through."
Hey, Neil, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
On this anniversary day of Subir Chatterjee's death, every year I'm thinking about Neil, the Chatterjee family, and the loss they suffered. I know this is a hard day. You know, I'm thinking about you and your family on this day every year.
Well, I appreciate it. My family's at peace today because you never gave up. You know, and I love you for it.
We met through this tragedy, but we've become good friends.
I love Hubbard so much. He was so committed and so dedicated, and he wanted to provide justice to my family.
When he told me that the murderer has been arrested, I thought my prayer has been answered. A great relief.
Finally catching the bad guys, there's no better feeling. But if it hadn't been for Subir, we wouldn't be here today. He was brave enough to fight with a gun in his face. Having seen it all the way through to the bitter end, I am satisfied. One of the best times of my life. I'm still enjoying it. I'll put it that way.
My mom said, "Angie, your daddy's dead. That he was killed." I just kept saying over and over, "You're lying. You guys are lying. You're wrong."
It was a very shocking and grisly scene. There was a lot of blood.
He was stabbed over 30 times. Mr. Martinez did not go down easy. He did fight for his life.
I don't think I really understood that I was really never going to see him again.
It became more and more frustrating that we still had not been able to solve the murder.
He was the first one to ever deny giving me DNA. He was very suspicious of that.
It was important to me to find that closure that these people desperately need.
I was not going to give up. I wanted justice for my dad.
Hi. Oh, it's so short. Oh my God. Right? Oh my God. Here's a little crazy.
The La Mesa Police Department received a 911 call from somebody identifying themselves as Karen Stacy, and she was concerned for the welfare of her fiance, Scott Martinez, who was at his apartment in La Mesa. She said he was not answering her phone calls, and she thought that he may be suffering a medical emergency. Police officers and fire personnel were dispatched to the scene and arrived in about 10 minutes. The front door was locked. The firefighters used a ladder to look through Mr. Martinez's second floor living room window. And from that vantage point, they were able to see that Mr. Martinez was on the ground on his back. They immediately requested first responders force entry into the residence.
Firemen break down the front door and realize this is much more than a simple welfare check.
Walking up the staircase for the first time, not really knowing what to expect, it was a very shocking and grisly scene. It appeared as though a very serious and violent struggle had occurred. They immediately see Mr. Martinez lying on his back. He had numerous defensive wounds to his hands, stab wounds along his chest, to his thighs, his shoulders. Mr. Martinez is eviscerated, so his intestines are out on top of his body. We'd learned that he had been stabbed over 30 times. It was a very brutal and violent homicide. There was blood from Mr. Martinez throughout the living room. His fingers and his hands had many deep cuts. One of his fingers was almost severed. Mr. Martinez did not go down easy. He fought for his life. There was a sword on the ground next to Mr. Martinez's body. It appeared to be about 3 feet in length. The sword was bent completely in half, and there was blood on the blade, so it was obvious that that weapon had been used in the murder of Mr. Martinez. Mr. Martinez was a collector of edged weapons. There were literally knives and swords everywhere in the apartment, which led me to believe that maybe a fight happened that got out of hand. This sword was probably found in the apartment and then used in the struggle to kill Mr. Martinez. There was no forced entry to the apartment. The injuries were violent. They were intended to cause pain and injury, which indicated to us that the suspect in this case likely knew Mr. Martinez and had a very personal reason for wanting to attack him.
The 47-year-old's murder leaves 2 daughters without their father.
My dad was an amazing father. We had just a great bond from the very beginning. I was Daddy's little girl. Our Saturday ritual was getting up and turning on all the Saturday morning cartoons. And we would just sit there for hours watching cartoons. He was my best friend, and even all through my 20s, he just was constant in my life. My parents were only together for a couple years. I never expected my dad to have any more kids. He had girlfriends, but I was an only child for 21 years. So finding out that Jesse was coming along was a complete shock to me. And he was just thrilled. He could not wait to have another baby.
I was 5 going on 6 when my dad died. I always remember getting in his car when he'd pick me up from school, and I would just tell him about my day. I'd tell him all the new friends I would make at school. You could talk to him forever. My dad would always tell me not to talk to boys because they're liars. They pick their noses.
Early in the morning, there was a knock at the door, and my mom was standing there, and she said, I need to talk to you. And my mom said, Angie, your daddy's dead. And I just fainted on the spot. And I came to a couple minutes later, and she's like, do you remember anything I just said to you? And I said, no. And she was, Angie, your dad's dead, that he was killed. And I just burst into tears. I just kept saying over and over, you're lying, you guys are lying, you're wrong.
While processing Scott's apartment, crime scene techs find something that could point them to the killer.
In the bathroom, there were some blood drops in the sink and near the toilet. When somebody is attacked with a knife, it is very common for the attacker to also become injured themselves. The blood is very slippery, your hand can slip, and then you become injured yourself.
There was an empty toilet paper roll. It looked like the suspect went into the bathroom and used that toilet paper to attempt to bandage himself.
Also in the bedroom, there were some blood drops that were found on the windowsill. And the bedroom window was open, and the screen was ripped out. It definitely indicated that this was a potential exit for the suspect.
Directly underneath the bedroom window, there was a large amount of tissue paper that was stuck in a small branch of a tree. It appears to have been when the suspect jumped out of that second floor window, that impromptu bandage got stuck in the tree. The blood evidence collected from the scene is immediately sent to the San Diego Sheriff's Crime Laboratory for the DNA testing.
We were very glad to have what appeared to be the suspect's blood in the crime scene. We knew that this could very likely be the evidence that convicts whoever committed this murder.
While they're still on the scene, investigators get what could be a case-breaking clue.
One neighbor told us that they had seen a white male and a white female in the parking area for the apartment building in a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. After being there a short time in the area of Mr. Martinez's door, they left.
Because of the close proximity of when the homicide could have occurred, these two individuals in that vehicle definitely were thought to be involved. This vehicle seemed like it could be leaving the crime scene.
We definitely needed to identify them, get them tracked down so we can find out what they know. This couple were likely to be the last people to see Mr. Martinez alive. This couple in the Volkswagen Beetle were potentially suspects, and at this point, our best lead in figuring out what had happened at the apartment. It was extremely difficult to try and identify this couple because we didn't know their names, we didn't know the license plate number of the vehicle. So we were starting from scratch and trying to figure out who they were.
Investigators hunt for the Volkswagen and try to learn more about their victim, Scott Martinez.
As we began looking into Mr. Martinez's background, we found that he was a family man who had 2 daughters. He had a fiance, and we learned that Mr. Martinez was a prolific gambler. He enjoyed playing high-limit slot machines. He had a lot of betting receipts in his apartment that indicated he oftentimes won large jackpots in the $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 range.
Once my dad called me and he's like, "Your dad just hit $75,000. I'm going to be taking care of all your bills." And he was good at it. He always won, always.
Carrying around cash from jackpot prices might have made Scott a target.
Nothing seemed out of place except for the clear struggle that occurred in the living room. There was a jacket that Mr. Martinez had in his closet that had several $1,000s in one of the pockets. But the cash that was there was not visible. It was hidden in a jacket. And also, the scene kind of indicated that the suspect was interrupted based off the grabbing an available weapon found in Mr. Martinez's apartment. Fleeing out the second floor window, if motive was robbery, there may not have been enough time.
One thing we noticed as we spoke with family and friends and associates of Scott's is that he had a lot of women in his life that he dated that would help him around his house, that would help him with babysitting.
The women that Mr. Martinez did date, some of them were married, had boyfriends. Jealousy is definitely something that could easily translate into the violent struggle that took place with Mr. Martinez. It was very possible that the other men could be jealous of Scott and want to hurt him.
Detective Runge looks for a possible jealous husband or boyfriend. Meanwhile, Scott's own fiancée changes her story about the morning Scott was found dead.
Karen Stacy told me that the 911 call she had made asking for the police and the fire department to check on Scott's welfare was fabricated. She already knew that Scott was either severely injured or deceased. Knowing that there was no forced entry, now we had that fiance telling us that they had already lied to investigators. I am immediately thinking that Karen has more involvement in Scott's murder than we had previously assumed.
Despite Karen's lies, investigators listened to her new account of what happened that morning.
What Karen told me was that there was a man and a woman, John and Kelly, who went to Scott's apartment to visit him.
John and Kelly were friends of Scott Martinez, and Kelly was also sometimes a babysitter for Scott's youngest daughter. They had plans to meet with him that evening. When they arrived, they found that the door was locked, and they got no response from inside. They hear what sounds like maybe moaning or some noises from inside. So Kelly uses her key to go inside the apartment. She finds Martinez lying on his back at the top of the steps. And while she's up there, she hears a noise that comes from the back of the apartment. This noise startles her because she can see that Martinez is injured. And now she knows that there's potentially someone in the back of the apartment. Her and John flee the apartment.
Karen told me they left in the yellow Volkswagen Beetle. They drove away and contacted Dino. Dino Heath was one of Miss Martinez's best friends. Kelly told Dino what they had found. Nobody between Dino, John, and Kelly wanted to be involved. They felt that their criminal histories would perhaps lead law enforcement to suspect them. So they decided that they would contact Karen. and that she should call the police.
Dino was a good friend of Mr. Martinez, was close to him for most of his life. So why is he telling Karen Stacy to call 911? And even if a friend told you to call police, why would a fiance lie about that? It was very suspicious at the time. This case quickly became complicated due to people being deceitful, and it led to multiple suspects kind of all over the place. When John and Kelly leave Scott's apartment, obviously they've seen something traumatic. Their friend is likely dead. They do not call the police, however.
There were ways that you could call the police anonymously and report that there was somebody that was hurt. We wanted to know exactly why John and Kelly didn't do that. We don't know at this point if John or Kelly are capable of committing a crime like this or had a motive to do so. So we wanted to get their stories nailed down so that we could prove or disprove the things they were telling us. When we met in person with John and Kelly, we checked their hands and looked at their bodies to see if there were any injuries that indicated they were involved in a violent struggle or fight, and there were none. John and Kelly both gave us their DNA samples, and we sent them to be compared to the suspect's DNA.
Investigators got the lab report on the bloody toilet paper found at the crime scene.
From the blood evidence, we were able to develop a DNA profile of the suspect.
So now they can load the DNA profile into a CODIS database. And the CODIS database is all known suspects, people arrested, people convicted of crimes. And then they can directly compare it to it. The police did that, loaded it up, and there was no matches.
At the time of my dad's death, I was still in my 20s. It was so just unreal to me that this was my reality now, that my dad was gone. I did go to clean up the apartment. I felt I had to do it out of respect for him because that was his personal belongings. We were exposed to blood splatter from his TV to the blinds to the carpeting. I was sick to my stomach. The knives and stuff, I threw those out because I didn't want to see a knife ever again. It's definitely the hardest thing I ever had to do or go through. I had nightmares for years. I still do. How do you get that image out of your head?
Police tracked down Scott's old friend Dino, the man who persuaded Martinez's fiancée to make the false 911 call.
When we first spoke with Dino, he wanted to meet with us outside and was adamant and very, very serious about us not coming into the home. He was not very forthcoming with a lot of information about Scott, so we felt that there was a lot of things that he wasn't telling us.
Scott owned one full-size sedan and a motorcycle that were in Dino's name. Mr. Martinez at the time had a suspended license, so we learned that he had a plan with Dino that if anything ever happened with the police, he didn't want his vehicles to be impounded. So if they were under Dino's name, he would be able to get those vehicles back.
Dino went to Karen's house to gain possession of Mr. Martinez's Harley-Davidson motorcycle, which was suspicious to us because on a day where he was supposedly mourning the loss of his friend, his first priority was to get possession of that motorcycle.
When Dino was first interviewed by the detectives in the preliminary stages, he was asked to give his DNA voluntarily. So this would be just a cotton swab within the mouth, reasonably easy for a witness, a friend to give. But Dino was not interested in giving that DNA swab to them.
When we have somebody who's a close friend of a murder victim and they're refusing to give their DNA, it definitely raises a lot of questions for us. We want to know the reasoning behind that. Is it because they think that we're going to discover they're the ones who did it?
If someone is a friend of Mr. Martinez, why would they lie? It was a red flag for Dino that he could be involved.
We did a full background check on Dino. He had been arrested for some low-level crimes throughout his life, but there was nothing that would indicate that he was the type of criminal that would conduct a violent assault on somebody. We were looking at Dino's hands to see if he had any injuries, and he did not have any injuries.
Just because he did not have the injuries did not completely rule him out as being involved. If he had potential motive, let's say for the vehicles or Martinez's property, he could still be involved in setting up Martinez. He knew Martinez. He could be the one that got access into the house.
Although Dino refused to do so for the first several interviews we had with him, he did eventually consent to providing us with a DNA sample.
I sent Jessie to live with her mom in Utah because I couldn't take care of her. I was grieving horrifically. I could barely even take care of myself. I just sat with Jessie and I said, that Dad's gone, and he's not going to be coming back. And she said, yes, Mom told me. She was so young. She only got a handful of years with him.
As a 6-year-old, you don't really understand what death is. I don't think I really understood that I was really never going to see him again.
It broke my heart to have to send her away to her mom's because I didn't know when I would see her again.
Detectives determined that although Scott's fiancée, Karen, initially lied, she was at her home at the time of Scott's murder, and she is ruled out as a suspect. They then processed the DNA samples of John and Kelly, who claimed to have found Scott's body, and of his evasive friend, Dino.
We sent them to be compared to the suspect's DNA, and unfortunately, they all came back negative. As we proceeded with this investigation, we tracked down every lead that we possibly could. Nothing was giving us that key piece of information that pointed towards any one individual being the person that committed this murder.
After more than a year, leads dry up like a summer rain in the desert. The case of the murdered father of two goes cold.
As soon as they called me and told me that it was going into a cold case file, it was discouraging. There was still nothing. This guy was out on the loose.
Scott's murder hangs over his family and friends like a dark cloud.
The older I got, the more I realized he wasn't going to be there anymore. It would have been nice for my dad to see my milestones, my baby, and my graduation, and meet my boyfriend. And he's never going to see them.
I did start drinking too much. I did attempt suicide one time. I was so disappointed in myself, and I just knew that my dad would have been as well. And it was after that that I went into therapy and got on medication. It just instilled a new kind of hope. I wanted to know who did this to my dad, who took my sister's father away from her. She didn't get what I had. I was not going to give up. I wanted justice for my dad.
In 2016, I was assigned full-time to work cold cases at La Mesa PD. And one of the first cases I began working was the Martinez homicide. I had no experience working cold case prior to this, so I'm trying to do something that all the detectives before me had not been successful. I did have at least a clear sense of what I needed to do. We have our suspect DNA on that toilet paper. It was someone whose DNA was not in CODIS. I knew the DNA belonged to a male. I created a list of all males that were witnesses, friends, family that could be involved, hoping for a new potential suspect, someone whose DNA was not collected at the time. Every witness that I spoke with was compliant, would give me a DNA sample, cooperate with me, but it never came back as a match.
In 2018, an emerging DNA technology called genetic genealogy offers investigators a new option when CODIS comes up empty.
The arrest of the Golden State Killer occurred in 2018. As an investigator at the time, I learned that this case was solved using a genetic genealogy.
What genetic genealogy does is it can take the DNA evidence from a crime scene that's unidentified, upload it into this public database, and if this unidentified person who left their DNA at a crime scene had an aunt, let's say, that had uploaded her DNA into the system looking for other relatives or looking to build their family tree, this will connect.
Investigators submit their suspect's DNA, and the lab surprises them with quick answers.
They did it in a weekend, providing me with two different suspects. The two individuals that they believed could be involved was a Rick Collette and a Zachary Bundy. Rick Collette and Zachary Bundy was a nephew-uncle relationship. I immediately started looking for the connection to the case. I did some work in looking at Rick Collette. He had mild criminal history, nothing that stood out as kind of a red flag or an immediate concern. What was interesting is at the time we believed he was likely living in the city of Carlsbad, about 45 minutes away from the city of La Mesa, and he was of similar age to Martinez. It was possible he could be in the same social circles. But doing all my checks on Rick Collette, I found no connection between himself and Scott Martinez or any of the associates of Scott Martinez. So I immediately switched into focusing now on Zachary Bundy. I found that at the time, he was likely living in La Mesa in 2006 when Scott was murdered. La Mesa is a reasonably small city, so clearly that jumped out of the page. I found that Zachary Bundy at the time had been in a dating relationship with Adira Roth. Adira Roth was documented as one of Martinez's babysitters and also had previously turned in a key to Scott's apartment that she had. So now that I have the connection between Zachary Bunny and Adair Roth and the key, it definitely played a part with going back to there was no forced entry.
Detective Gremillon reviews Adair's 2006 statement.
The only initial interview of Adair Roth was when she returned her key to the police department, and she was never interviewed about her relationship with Scott or anything like that. It was like a one-paragraph report that she turned in her key. That was it. After doing the checks on Zachary Bunny and then finding those connections to Scott Martinez, it seemed like the best information that we'd had in this case in years that could be our suspect. I was very interested at that point. In reviewing Zachary Bunny's criminal history, it was very minimal, small drug infractions, nothing major, nothing that stood out as violent criminal history that could relate to potentially a homicide. Through records checks, I was able to find that he was now living in Hillsboro, Oregon. He was a jet engine mechanic at a local small airfield. So I planned to bring a group of investigators to go in person and try to collect a DNA sample from him. I traveled with a team of 2 La Mesa detectives and 2 U.S. Marshals up to Hillsboro, Oregon, with the main focus of trying to collect DNA sample secretly from Zachary Bunny. We were watching Zachary Bunny's apartment. A couple hours into the surveillance, we see him exit his apartment carrying what looks to be a 6-pack of beer bottles in his right hand. He walks to the nearby dumpster for the apartment and sets the beer bottles down. One of my partners is immediately able to get out, collect those beer bottles secretly, and come back to the vehicle. We take those items immediately to mail them back overnight to La Mesa Police Department to have them tested at the San Diego Sheriff's Crime Lab. So for us, immediately this was great news. Within a few hours, we have good potential items of evidence that we've shipped off for DNA. Now we're just waiting for those results. After 2 days, I was in my hotel room when I got the phone call from the lab that the results from the beer bottles that we sent in were not a match to our evidence. When I got that news, it didn't make any sense to me. It felt like it was kind of all falling apart. I was left trying to figure out what exactly happened here. Either Zachary Bunny is not the suspect in this case, or that the beer bottles had someone else's DNA on them.
In the meantime, I was working on getting search warrants for his DNA and search warrants for the apartment that he lived in at that time.
So I immediately get the search warrant and was able to be waiting for Zachary Bunny when he came home from work. I asked him several questions. He was visibly nervous. He was scanning around the parking lot. He looked like he was at any point ready to run. He said that he did not know Scott Martinez, had never been to his house. And then when I asked him for consent for his DNA, he didn't want to do that. At this point, I felt 100% certain that I had the right guy. The main thing running through my mind at that point was his visible reaction to us. Clearly nervous, scanning the parking lot, looking for ways out. This was what I'd been looking for this entire time.
Using a search warrant, Detective Gremillon obtains a DNA sample from Zachary Bunny. Crime techs immediately compare it to the DNA found at the crime scene. This time, it's a match.
Now that I know that he is a match, it's a satisfying feeling that all the hard work and effort that I put into years in this case that you finally have found your suspect in a cold case.
On January 10th, 2019, After 13 years without answers, Zachary Bunny is arrested and charged with the murder of Scott Martinez.
Myself and my partner were able to meet with Zachary Bunny in an interview room. Which is sort of clear is that a case has been issued by our San Diego DA for homicide. If I want to ask you questions or anything like that, I just got to read you this first and we can go from there. You have the right to remain silent, you understand? Mm-hmm. He was very calm. He looked a little bit defeated, but he did not seem surprised in any way. I'm looking at June of 2006. Do you know where in June of 2006 you were living at that time? I don't want to answer that one. Okay, no problem. Mitch used to be a clerk at AMPM in Claremont. I don't want to answer that one. Okay. You want to answer any questions I have? No. Okay. He did say he didn't want to speak with us and asked for a lawyer. But during that, I was able to take photographs of his hands, and he had significant scarring across both his palms and his fingers. That looked like to me is that he never went to the hospital and received treatment for that injury. It most likely healed incorrectly. My immediate next move is to notify Angie of the good news.
He was like, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "What's going on?" And he was like, "We got him. I just handcuffed him 10 minutes ago." I was like, "Are you serious?" I just started bawling my eyes out. I just felt like this black cloud I had been carrying around for years. It was gone. I felt I could breathe again.
I was 17 years old and working at McDonald's, and my mom called me when she told me what happened. I was pretty shocked that my babysitter's boyfriend killed my dad. I don't remember him at all.
Zachary Bunny wasn't a suspect back in 2006, but when detectives re-interview witnesses, a friend of Dara Roth gives police a missing puzzle piece, a motive.
She told me that I told her he knew she was cheating on him. She told me she was cleaning Scott's house, and then he told her he followed her there. And he said that he'd been stalking her, and he said he knew who the guy was she was cheating on. But
So he knew where he lived. That puts him right there at the crime scene and gives him the motive to want to do this.
I don't believe Zachary Bunny went to Scott Martinez's house with the intent to kill, but I do believe it's very likely that he went there to steal from him, or he went there with jealousy and anger to confront Scott Martinez, and the fight ensues, and he kills Scott Martinez with that sword.
With a murder trial looming, Bunny's attorneys asked prosecutors for a plea deal.
My fear at trial is that Bunny is going to go into court and say, I was upset because Scott was involved with my girlfriend, and I went to his house, we got into a fight, and I was defending myself. We also take into consideration what the victim's family wants as well.
It had been so long, and for mine and my sister's sake, I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to close that chapter of darkness and grieving.
On November 13th, 2019, Bunny pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter. He is sentenced to 12 years in prison. During his sentencing, Bunny speaks directly to Scott's family.
I'm sorry for the pain that this has caused the Martinez family. I know that words cannot bring back a life, but I'm truly sorry.
I think Zachary Bunny apologized because he got caught. I wanted Zachary Bunny to acknowledge what he did and why. Look at me. Look at what you did to our family, to our dad. Show me that you have some remorse, that you feel guilty at all. But I got none of that from him. Hi.
Oh, you're so short. Seeing Angie for the first time in 17 years and letting her meet my baby was amazing.
Hey, there you go. Look at Auntie Angie.
Make sure you keep the binky in her mouth because she will try to take it. My dad doesn't get to meet my baby, but I'm so glad that somebody from that side of my family gets to.
She's getting sleepy.
Yeah.
I know he's seen what Jesse and I are doing with our lives and how far we've come and how close of a bond we still have.
Crazy how much he likes you just first thing.
Yeah, it's like she knew I was your sister.
I definitely think he would be proud too, to see what both of us have done with our lives, especially to have a little grandbaby.
He would have been a great grandpa.
I didn't just lose him, I lost everything I could have had with him.
I miss my dad every day. All day, every day.
Shauna and I were very close. She was my sister.
When I woke up that next morning, Shauna wasn't there. The police told me they discovered a body.
I see bruises all over her arms and legs. This was not natural. This is homicide.
As soon as I saw the blood and the hair, I just thought, oh man, the suspect's here.
We have a search warrant to collect DNA from him.
I was afraid that they might convict me of this. I was scared for my life.
Take care of your siblings. But there's some things in this world you just can't get back.
Take one, Mark.
Again, you, sir.
This is the first time I've ever seen these photos. You could just tell by looking at her that she had a good outlook on life. She's always smiling. She was happy. And so was I. She had a very beautiful life. That's what I missed about her the most. Shauna, she was the love of my life.
It's a warm and sunny day in rural Washington state when a panicked park goer calls police.
I was told that a group of Boy Scouts in a canoe trip had come upon the body of this young woman that was kind of washed up on a sandbar in the middle of the river. They picked her up, put her into the canoe, and brought her over to shore. But they didn't want to risk the water being able to wash her down the river. One of the scoutmasters was a doctor. He realized that there was something absolutely wrong here. This was a young woman who had nothing but a bra on that was pushed up around her shoulders, laying face down in the water. I run out to the scene. It was bright, sunny. It was early afternoon, 3:30, 3:40. It was a beautiful day.
When we got there, the canoe was lifted up out of the water, and they put a covering over her. The first thing you want to try to do is figure out who this was. And at that point, there's nothing on her that is going to be able to identify her. I did not think she had been dead very long. I've seen a lot of bodies. Generally, water changes things pretty fast, and she didn't appear to be changing that quickly. So that made me think that she'd not been in the water very long. She had been battered around, and especially on her forehead, the open fracture, kind of an oblong, odd shape. I remember thinking, what type of object could it have been that created that? This was not natural. This is homicide.
As sisters, Shauna and I were very close, 18 months apart. But my relationship with Shauna was mother-daughter. I had to be the parent because our parents weren't in our lives for a very long time. Shauna was a very good cook, even at 7. She did the biscuits and gravy. Shauna made gravy that would make your feet fall off. It was that good. Shauna was bubbly. She wasn't a cheerleader, but she definitely loved to do their hair and their makeup for Friday Night Lights. Shauna had the makeup down. She could take things from your kitchen and make you look beautiful. That's just how she was.
I met Shauna around 1992 at a party. Me and Shauna was drawn to each other just instantly. I asked Shauna for a date, and she agreed, and we went on a few dates. She was real funny. I'd do a little odd jobs. She'd work at some fast food restaurants. She used to sneak me out some fries and some milkshakes. We just loved being around each other. We made each other laugh. She was just real fun to be around. In 1993, Shauna and I left Arkansas and headed to Washington State. When I was younger, my family, we used to work at farms up in Washington, picking cherries and apples. So I knew the work was there, and I was having some trouble finding some jobs here in Arkansas. So me and her talked it over, and we decided we wanted to see if we can find some work in the state of Washington and try to make a life for ourselves.
Shoot, Brittany.
Yeah, I'd like to report a missing person.
And what's your name?
Travis. Cindy.
Who's missing?
My girlfriend. I got to drinking whiskey pretty heavily last night, and I guess I blacked out, passed out or something, and I woke up, she was gone. Her clothes and everything's here at the house, and I ain't seen her since last night.
What's her name?
Shauna Yandel. We just come up here from Arkansas to pick cherries.
And we'll get an officer there shortly, okay?
Okay, we'll just take her out and work it down.
Okay.
Travis provides the dispatcher with a physical description of missing girlfriend, Shauna Yandel.
They said it was a young gal, 5'2", slight build, reddish hair. I'm looking at this person that fits that description. And I basically said, grab this guy so we can get started.
Detectives asked Travis to come down to the station.
They take me to a room and they start asking me questions about what I did that night and what we were doing. But it seemed like they was doubting me.
So I advised Travis that we had found a body in the river and it's possibly Shauna, but we didn't know for sure. When I told him that, I remember he put his head down and he started mumbling to himself. He teared up and he kept saying, "This was my fault, this was my fault."
Detective Scherslade asks Travis to come to the morgue to see if he can identify the body.
Even on the way to the morgue, he was very sad, and I remember he cried a couple of times.
I walked into the room and there was a body bag laying on the table. This guy unzipped it from the feet up. I knew exactly that it was her. She loves to paint her toenails certain little colors, and I knew right then when I seen her toes that it was her. I lost it. It was the most horrific thing I ever seen. She was black and blue from her head to toes. That's something I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Travis was kind of an enigma to me. Is he somebody that we should be looking at as far as a suspect?
A lot of the times it is the boyfriend or the husband or someone close, someone who knows them that did commit the crime. So off the bat, he was our first suspect.
The detective asked me, he said, "Was this you?" And I told him, "No, this wasn't me, and I couldn't do this to anybody." I was afraid that they might convict me of this and I'd spend the rest of my life in prison or worse. I was scared for my life. I was a suspect because I was the last one to see Shauna alive. The detective just kept constantly asking me questions over and over and over. I was frightened. I heard one of the officers say that he's the one that done it. That's the guy that did it. I didn't know what to think when I heard that. That just set my mind in a spin.
I was working at a motel and I got the phone call. And when I picked it up, it was my mom. And she said, "Shannon, are you sitting down?" She just said, "Sissy's dead. Sissy's dead." And that was Shauna. I fell to the floor. She said he threw her into the river, still alive. When the Boy Scouts found her, she still had goosebumps. I just wanted to cry. That somebody could do something like that to a human being.
Back in Yakima, Travis lays out to detectives his account of how Shauna went missing.
The plan was to go down to Kennewick. Shauna and a couple of friends of mine was going to try and see if we get a job working in the orchards. There was 4 of us in the car that day. It was Me, Shauna, Kenneth, and his girlfriend. Kenny was a cousin of the Wilkies. The Wilkies were friends of the family, and I would stay with them during the seasons every time I'd come up.
They did make it back to Yakima, maybe 6 to 7 o'clock. Travis and Shauna were dropped off, but Travis didn't want to go back to the Wilkies' house.
We decided just to go to the park, about a mile away from the Wilkies. We knew that we can go there and hang out on the Yakima River and drink a few more suds. We was hanging out, and I was messed up. I fell in the river. I was wet and cold, and it just got dark. I knew that the bathrooms had one of them hand dryers that would put off some heat. Shauna didn't drink as much as I did, so she was trying to take care of me. She was wanting to go home, but before that can happen, I blacked out. Probably around 1 o'clock when I came to, and she wasn't there. I was thinking maybe she walked home, so I walked home too. I got to the Wilkies, and she wasn't there, so I went to sleep. I don't know what I was thinking. I was too far gone. When I woke up that next morning, Shauna wasn't there, so I head back to the park. I hollered for her, and I got no answer. I couldn't find her, so I was getting really worried. So I went back to the Wilkies and called the police.
Travis was asked if he would be willing to submit to a polygraph, and he readily agreed to do that.
I was just so nervous and scared, didn't know what to think. The questions that they would ask me would throw you off.
They always ask you your name, are you male, female, or yes or no questions. The actual questions to the crime is only going to be a few. Do you know anything about Shauna Yandell being placed in the river? Do you know anything about how she got there?
I took 3 polygraph tests. I passed every one.
It's frustrating because everything that I can see circumstantially tells me that, yeah, he's very much part of this story, but he's not who I'm looking for.
I'm sure that Shauna would have fought back to whoever attacked her, and Travis had no injuries, no scratches, no marks, no bruises.
I understand why they might have thought that I could have had something to do with it. I was the last one with her, and I was drunk. There was a lot of evidence to pointing at my way.
With Travis no longer a suspect, he mentioned something that draws the detective's attention.
In Travis's interview, he explained that Kenny was flirting with Shauna. So that's how Kenny Madden became a suspect.
Ken and I already had somewhat of a rapport. I had dealt with Ken in the past, and it was involving a criminal activity.
Kenny didn't have a good reputation. He was not a good person.
Kenny was a bully. He wasn't a very nice guy. There was some bad blood between me and Kenny.
I mean, they had been together all that day, traveled all the way down the Tri-Cities and back. Travis and Kenny drank a lot of alcohol.
Travis got upset with Kenny because he thought Kenny was flirting with Shauna. That made him mad.
So they were arguing.
Travis wanted to fight Kenny. Kenny stopped the car. It was escalating to that point.
Does that provide a motive for Ken to have been participating in this crime? You never know.
He was really angry with Travis. Possibly he would want to get revenge or retaliation.
I think Kenny could have done something like this because I didn't know where they had went after they dropped me off.
Kenny knew the area very well. So now Ken is somebody who could be a possible suspect.
Travis stated that Kenny was flirting with Shauna. The emotions run high in those type of situations, and it provokes people to anger. I could see that in Kenny. He would get angry if you pushed him. Kenny was a Wilkies. He could have known that Travis and Shauna were at the park and had no way home. And then got over there to either look for them or look for Shauna specifically. I interviewed Kenny Madden, and I also interviewed his girlfriend, Kim. Kenny's alibi was they went over to see some friends at 8:45 at night, and they stayed there till after 9 o'clock. They then left that house, and they went to his grandfather's house. And then they stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning. I spoke with the couple that they went to go visit, and they confirmed that Kenny and Kim were there. I contacted his grandfather, and he said yes. And their stories corroborated perfectly.
You do what you can to either confirm or eliminate him as a suspect. We'd put him on the polygraph and managed to find out that Ken was, in fact, being truthful. All of the places that he was at and the times were, in fact, confirmed.
I was confident that Kenny had nothing to do with Shauna's death. When Kenny and Travis were no longer suspects, we tried to piece together what might have happened that night. Where Shauna was last seen at Sportsman State Park was about 2 miles upriver from where she was found. Shauna definitely had to be put in a car and was transported at least 2 miles where she was dumped into the river.
Detectives broaden their focus. They pay a visit to the family that Travis and Shauna were staying with.
At this point, we're now just gathering as much information as we possibly can. So I wanted to talk to the Wilkies and ask them about what was going on, what they knew, if they knew anything. So we show up. Joyce Wilkie is the person I met with first, and she introduces me to her husband, Junior, and Brian Wilkie.
Although Junior and Joyce Wilkie cooperate with detectives, their son Brian seems less willing to help.
During the conversation, Brian makes this offhanded comment.
He made the comment, well, she shouldn't have been there. Something to that effect.
That bothered me. I'm thinking, why would you say something like this knowing what had taken place?
Detective Scherschleit asks to look inside the Wilkie's car.
Mr. Wilkie was very cooperative. He said, yes, no problem. He signed a waiver. And as we were getting ready to sign it, Brian Wilkie became very upset and adamant. You can't search that vehicle. Dad, you don't let them do that. There's no reason for them to search that vehicle.
Brian Wilkie didn't really want us to be looking in that car, but did log down.
Junior said, go ahead and search it. I remember standing there at the back of the car, and we popped the trunk. And right there in the middle of the trunk was a large tire iron. And there was what appeared to be blood all over it, and a long strand of reddish blonde hair, probably 8 to 10 inches long.
Now, I'm thinking this kind of fits that impression for skull fracture. Am I looking at the weapon that was used to kill her?
At that point, I directed my attention towards Brian. He had access to that vehicle, and he would have possibly known that Shauna was at the park by herself that night. He could have taken the keys. I thought, oh no, the suspect's here, or the Wilkie guys did it.
Are we actually looking at the person who is responsible for her death?
As soon as I saw that tire iron with the blood and the hair, I just thought, oh man. As soon as I saw that tire iron with the blood and the hair, I just thought that's a perfect match for the wound on Shauna's head. The tire iron was rusted black, and you could see the blood on it. There was one strand of hair.
We're thinking, okay, we've now got something physical to hang on to that maybe we can tie what happened to Shauna.
All we wanted to do was get the evidence to the crime lab. Because it was a high priority case, so we wanted to find out as soon as possible. The results came back to Detective Wentz.
It was not blood, and the fibers that were stuck to it, it's dissimilar to her hair. It didn't match.
You're let down because now you're starting over from scratch, from square one.
With no suspect to speak to, no lead to pursue, the case of the woman in the river goes as cold as ice melt in spring.
As the years passed, without having any answers to what happened, it was hard. When I still close my eyes, I still see that image of Shauna back in 1993. Hanging her on that slab.
We knew she was murdered, but we really didn't know all the details. I was hopeful that it would be solved, but after about 10 years, 12 years, you just go, well, this is not going to happen. No one's going to know.
It was very stressful because when you're in detectives, you never let the cases go. You're always thinking about them. What did I do wrong? What did I miss? That's why there's sometimes a burnout in detectives who do these kind of crimes for a long time.
It's like a burr under your saddle. It's always irritating. It's there. And until you get some direction to go, it's always going to be there.
Year after year, the case slowly gathers dust until a new forensic lab supervisor by the name of Kristen Schaefer starts looking through the department's cold cases.
We had an archive room that had all of the cold homicide cases in it, and Shauna's was one of the first ones I pulled out and reviewed. But there were DNA samples that could not be located.
Kristen Schaefer begins an extensive search for the DNA samples that she believes will help investigators identify Shauna Yandel's killer. After weeks of searching, her persistence pays off.
I found them in the refrigerator, Yakima Police Department. So they had been maintained in a secure and adequate cold room storage as required for DNA. Once the samples were identified, I remained in constant communication with the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab. So I kept calling and asking them about submitting what we have had to CODIS, the nationwide DNA database that's used to search samples. I sent it off at the end of 2005, and I would call routinely asking, when can I expect this? I kept being told it was still waiting assignment. So Shauna's case sat there, but I kept calling constantly.
Nearly 4 more years pass without any momentum on Shauna's case.
Funding came up that allowed Kristen to send this off to a independent lab to actually have the full spectrum run for DNA.
This case was eligible to be recipient of grant funding to be outsourced and processed much faster. I had results within months. There had been a hit in CODIS. I immediately contacted Nolan Wentz. I asked him to please come into the station for the DNA results, and he was there within minutes.
Kristen come running down the hall to show me. The profile actually matches somebody. I was amazed. It was huge.
The CODIS hit had identified Clayton Jean Stafford as the individual that had contributed to the DNA sample that was recovered from Shauna's body.
We finally got a name that is directly associated with this physical evidence. So now we need to go find out about this person. We found criminal history in California, Arizona. I start fleshing out a picture of who this is. What was he doing? Where was he living? Once we figured that out, he went there, and sure enough, he just comes walking out the front door because he sees several police cars wanting to know what's going on. And you're Clayton Stafford, right? Yeah. I'm more than happy to tell you what's going on.
When I received the CODIS hit in Shauna's case, that was the best day for me.
We're learning more about the man arrested in a cold case. Turns out he had a very long criminal history before this arrest for a 1993 murder.
Yakima police reopened the case 2 years ago and sent the DNA to a lab. It was also run through a national database. Clayton Stafford came up as a match, and he was found still living here in Yakima.
I had been present on multiple arrests. This by far was like none of the others. We've really not had a lens on him like we have for Shauna for 10 plus years, so this is all very new. It was an interesting process seeing who Clayton was. He lived alone. He lived under the radar for a number of years.
Now, just because we had the hit in CODIS doesn't mean that you're done with the DNA. We had to obtain a search warrant to collect DNA from him, I wanted to make certain we covered all the bases on this. We send it to the lab for independent analysis and comparison. We get back the results. It is him. And the odds are for that match to be him. 1 in 19.63 quadrillion.
Hello, you have a collect call from
Clayton Stafford.
an inmate at Yakima County Department of Corrections.
Hey, how you doing? How do you know? Well, I was on the news. I'm on the news. They picked up a first-degree murder. Yeah, is that right? Yeah, I was thinking. I don't care. I ain't got nothing to do with anything.
I spoke to Detective Wentz. He said, we got him, Shannon. I said, what? He said, we got him. To have Detective Wentz tell me we got him. And I was just relieved. I mean, after all those years, you got him?
With the DNA hit in hand, case is given to the prosecution.
Clayton Stafford was charged with aggravated first-degree murder premised upon first-degree rape. The work of building a case is the search for the truth. And in cold cases, going back and talking with those witnesses again is so important.
It was the first time I've been back to Washington State since Shauna's murder back in 1993.
Witnesses had important information that ultimately does help us to recreate the reality of the crime. Good morning. Good morning.
5 years after forensic lab supervisor Kristen Schaefer reopened Shauna's cold case, her testimony becomes a critical part of the trial.
This item is listed as buccal samples from Clayton Stafford.
Clayton Stafford's defense team does all they can to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence.
I'm asking you to agree with me that sperm can be placed in the vaginal vault through consensual sex, correct?
That is true, yes.
There was an argument that there may have been consensual sexual intercourse, that the person having sex was not the person who had committed the murder.
He was saying that he had sex with Shauna and he didn't have nothing to do with the murder. I was angry. I know Shauna and I know she wouldn't have done that.
The evidence that has been presented is that they had sex, and that's it.
My sister would not hook up with somebody who was going to hurt her.
The state is no closer at this moment proving that than they were at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on June 13th, 1993.
Did we prove each and every element of this crime beyond a reasonable doubt? The defense was denying that there was sufficient evidence for the intent to kill.
Purely speculation that Clayton Stafford actually committed this murder.
Clayton Stafford is a person that there is no evidence that Shauna ever knew. This was a rape, and that the person committing that rape also killed Shauna.
And in that process, not just with one blow to the head, not just two, not just three, not just four, but lethal force. The man seated before you, the last person to see Shauna Yandell, was the one who raped her and killed her. We ask you to find him guilty of first-degree murder.
Patty did an excellent job. But you're looking at a jury, and you've seen so many things where they come back and you'll get a verdict that just, wait a minute, where did this come from? So you're on the edge of your chair, pins and needles, waiting for that verdict. You're a kettle ready to boil over.
The jurors walk in slowly. The foreperson of the jury rises, says, yes, we have reached a verdict.
The verdict's read, and I remember squeezing Patty's hand.
He was convicted of aggravated first-degree murder based upon rape, and the sentence was life in prison.
My heart just about jumped out of my chest. That was the best feeling, knowing that you finally brought something to justice that didn't look like it was ever going to get solved. And Kristen is the one that got that ball rolling.
Shauna's case is my first solved cold case. Had I not found that evidence, Shauna's case would be still sitting on a shelf. I felt relief and just happiness for Shauna that we were able to come to this resolution.
I don't get any big pleasure or rush out of seeing somebody go to prison, but I did with this one. This man needs to be gone and never allowed out, ever.
There aren't cold cases for surviving families. Those cases are very much alive. The loss never goes away.
I would now ask family members of Shauna if they would like to speak.
In this case, we Skyped the surviving members of Shauna's family, and there was a large screen, and so they were able to speak about her.
Your Honor, this is Shannon Yandell Jones. She's Shauna's sister. This was my sister. We were only 18 months apart my whole life. Now we're 16 years apart. You took her away from me. You took her away from the family and the memories that we all could have shared. Where you were going, I guarantee you are going to encounter some really bad people. And I hope you get everything you deserve.
It's all those wondering questions, inklings, feelings, things like that. This is what closure is about, is knowing it's done and it's over. That's closure. She's my girl. She always was, and it's so hard to go through this life without her. Take care of your siblings, but there's some things in this world you just can't get back. I love her still. To this day, I don't care how long she's been gone. She is part of me, and I'll never get that back.
I can't never forgive myself for Sean's murder. This June will be the 30th anniversary. It's been a long time. Wish I could go back to that time and then I hope Shauna knows how much I miss her. I loved her. I really